Next slide. Most naturals were born with some physical advantages, but were also exposed to a solid player at a young age. Again, players can be built from scratch. You've got guys that don't really discover women till like early 20s. They might not even lose their virginity like 21, 22 after college, which is relatively late. I think the average age for men is like 15 now. And again, then you're talking about, but that's like a 6 or 7 year spread that they haven't had that much experience as opposed to your average guy. But a lot of very good seducers just simply were late bloomers, and that's fine. But most naturals do tend to have a combination of physical advantages, um, coincidences, I would say, even, and also being exposed to a player at a young age, which would fall under coincidences. You're in the vicinity of a player, be it your uncle or your father or a friend who was just a natural. And almost all naturals you'll see ran asshole game. They'll be like, God, he said stuff that I mean, I think that girls would have slapped him. Instead, they're like giggling and laughing. And then they were taking their clothes off around him. So you have to realize like naturals will look a little rough on the outside, a little rough on the edges, but girls react very well to them. And again, the self-confidence, either natural or built up over time and from their conquests and from their success. Either way, but you'll see more self-confidence than average. You'll see that irrational self-confidence. And then the ideal is to have some physical advantages, be it tall or you get exposed to, or just having a natural, even a neutral facial features is an advantage. Just a blank slate that can be worked upon. Avoiding being overweight. You don't have to be lean and mean or even muscular, but not being overweight is a physical advantage because it can distract or detract. And being exposed to a solid player at a young age. Then you add in game, which is learned charisma, and it can take these basics and you move forward. But most naturals, if you got here, sometimes these guys will have more natural ability than you realize. Like they're in the right place. They were good in drama. They were good in extemporaneous speaking. They're good at doing improv. I mean, there's little things they play an instrument. Musicians are used to getting anything that can get you up in front of people will help you with game. And anytime you're at the front of the room, these guys go, God, all of a sudden I felt like I was better looking than I thought I was. They are at the front of the room, they're playing an instrument, and then after the girls are coming up and talking to them because they were the focus of the presentation. And all of a sudden they feel more confident and they are more relaxed around women. They get used to this, and we call it like alpha by situation. It's kind of like a CEO. You can take a CEO and send him home, and his wife badgers him, and he's really like, jelly around her, and she's always on his ass. But in the office around his employees, he's an alpha because he's able to run girls around. He's able to be bossy. He's able to be confident. All the things that an alpha does, his behaviors, his charisma, is situational. It's in that environment. So a lot of naturals do tend to fall into the alpha by environment. And when they go home, it's not so much. And that's normal. So most naturals are a combination of physical advantages, tall, not overweight, and it's that important, and somewhat physically competent, but also exposed to a solid player at a young age. And again, it can be a friend, it can be a family member, it can be like the uncle that shows up with a new girl at every family party, and your mom doesn't like him, giving your dad some bad ideas. That's the uncle that's a player that a lot of naturals will mold themselves off of. You have to see it. It's one of the easiest things. That's why guys that have a wingman or get out and they'll go to boot camps where they meet up with like true hardcore pickup artists. like real social dynamics, they'll go out and actually, sarge or go out on the town. They'll go to clubs, and seeing guys do it makes it easier to do it yourself. It's kind of like when you go in the gym, they're like, I want you to do like squat. I want you to do bent over rows. And somebody that can show you exactly what it should look like makes it easier for you to get into that position. The same thing happens with game is you go out and you've got a guy that's better than you, and watching him interact and seeing what's possible and how he manages women, you will become better faster. This is a little bit more difficult if you don't have somebody to actually see them do it. That's why infield stuff is so good, but it's almost always like in low light, or they're using night shot and there's other ambient noise. So it's not as impactful as actually seeing it and having a buddy that you can do after action reports with and talk to them, and being in the moment. So if you do know someone, getting around them and going out, even if you got to pay for his drinks, just getting him out and watching him go is good for you. And you can pick up, and you might have to like run interference with a fat girl. There's a price you got to pay, but getting around guys that are better than you will go a long way to improving your game very quickly, very quickly. The only thing that can move it as quickly is daily study. I always suggest that at least 1 hour of focus in a day on game. In 1 year, you'll be better than 99.9% of the population of history with women. It's that fast. You can literally, change who you are. But most naturals are born with some physical advantages. And really, it's not like an advantage. It's like you don't have things holding you back. You don't have any facial disfigurement. You're not overweight. Just being normal looking and not being fat is a baseline that you can work off of. And then getting into shape can help you with confidence and just how you carry yourself and posture. All this matters. But the physical advantage, but we're also exposed to a solid player. Again, you got to see it to believe it, and you got to see it to mimic it. If you have some interest in you're seeing how these girls react to your uncle, you go, shit, I want to do that. I mean, that's easy. I can just be an asshole. I can just be my natural self. So that's the real deal when you're talking about what creates a natural. Naturals are born with some physical advantages, but we're also exposed to a solid player at a young age. And barring any of this, game, which is learned charisma, enhances all this, or you can start at 0, and we can usually add at least 2 to 3 points. If you're a 4, you're not scoring ever, we can get you to a solid 6 or 7. Because Royce has a thing on this: how much can game improve a man's life? And you can take a guy 2 to 3 points up the scale, depending on where they're at. It's actually easier to move a 4 to a 7 than a 7 to a 10. It might be nearly impossible. The higher you go, the less margin you have. So it's kind of like in businesses, there's certain numbers, like moving a guy who's making $3,000 a month to $10,000 is easier than moving 10 to 50. Just as far as like you can show some very basic stuff, and they'll move up the chain pretty rapidly. And the same thing happens with game or learn charisma. We can show you some very basic things if you're kind of struggling, and your game improves incredibly on those first 6 weeks, 6 months, because the basics are there. You add in the basics. And most of game is what not to do. At the end of the day, it's learning what not to do: not to double text, not to use emojis, not to take her to dinner, just to have a plan, not to wing it. So a lot of it's what not to do. And then if you throw those things out, all of a sudden you're doing like really well. So game can improve 2 to 3 points on a guy. Maybe even 4 if you're talking about somebody with no physical advantages, and then or a guy that's overweight, and get the weight off of him and get his charisma up. You're talking 4 points easy. But that's where you're at. Most naturals were born with some physical advantage, but we're also exposed to a solid player at a young age. And we'll do one more if we got it. Girls become